I'm going to try to take a lot of the themes that we talked about and summarize them up into this concept of connected vehicles. And we're going to talk specifically a lot about the connected car and some of the work that we're doing and what we're developing there. But then we'll have some fun and we'll talk about drones and how that applies to drones and some of the other vehicles that are out there in the ecosystem. So when you think about the connected car in the context of IoT, there's a lot of different IoT ecosystems. Some of them are, personal related. You've got your Fitbits and so forth, industrial related. But there's something kind of special about the car because it's very personal. We love to drive. We love our cars, at least most of us do. And I was thinking about this, and there's kind of an interesting intersection with IoT and the car ecosystem, and that is motion. Not only motion, but emotion, because the car evokes an emotional response in a lot of us. We love to drive. We personalize our cars. There's all these different brands. And when I saw this particular commercial, it's about a Mercedes, I think it's about 2012, so it's a few years old. It's not even an IoT connected car, but the point is here that we love cars, and it's a very personal experience, and there's a lot happening to make it an even more personal experience inside once that car is connected. Now, not everyone loves to drive or is an auto enthusiast, but we all like to be able to get around. We like motion. We like to be able to get from point A to point B. So the other option is autonomous vehicles, and we hear about autonomous vehicles all the time. If you search online for what's going on in connected car activity, autonomous vehicles and the stories about them will probably be some of the main things that you see. So this is a concept from Bentley. Scott McNeely yesterday kind of talked about rolling down the road in just basically a chassis without a steering wheel. So, if you're not into driving, you can imagine yourself just kicking back, taking your hands off the wheel on your commute, headed home, and checking your email, watching your favorite videos. And then when you get home, when you get off the road, off the highway, you can resume control, put your hands back on the wheel. So there's a lot of interesting things happening around autonomous vehicles where if you're not into driving, you're still into getting around in style, or maybe in a more simple way. but autonomy is definitely one of the things that's happening in the connected car world. Now, let's remember that cars can also do this. Okay, so the stakes are kind of high, right? That accident, there's many people die in car accidents, and I think even Scott was saying yesterday that, watch for the news when the first autonomous vehicle kills someone. So we talk a lot in our industry about security, but safety is another piece inside of the auto industry. And once the car is connected, safety and security go hand in hand. So the point there is that stakes are high. So whether you're a driver and you are an automotive enthusiast and you love cars, or whether you're going to look forward to riding in an autonomous vehicle, there's a lot of cool stuff going on and coming up in the future that is going to be related to identity or require identity in order to be valuable, right? So I looked over all the agenda and I kind of looked at what we were talking about while we were here yesterday and today, and I kind of came up with a summary of some of the topics that we've been talking about. And what I want to do through this talk is kind of go through those and map them all into a connected car use case so that we can see how all these different types of digital identities actually apply in the automotive industry to a connected car and take it down to the level of all the different things that we've talked about. So we talked about business value and customer experience, or user experience and customer focus, and how identity enables these, right? We always talk about trust and security and privacy, and how identity is an enabler of those pieces. And we just got done talking about we've talked about Internet of Things quite a bit, but we also talk about the evolving role of identity. So let's take those and map them into a connected car use case and just look at all the different areas where either A, identity is going to be required to make something work good enough, or it's just not going to work at all without the right type of identity capability. So I want to introduce a new term. It's called new mobility. It might be new to you. This is from a Detroit Free Press article talking about how new mobility is challenging automakers' assumptions. So if we think of identity in terms of business value, and we look at the automotive industry, there's some major disruption going on right now, because it's no longer just about how many cars you can sell. It's about being able to sell monetized services through the car. And I want to walk you through what some of those are today and how identity applies and how it's a critical enabler for many of them. So another way to think about new mobility is basically like this, right? So you've got the mobile phone. It has all different kinds of sensors. It's got cameras. It's got multiple radios. And that idea is basically moving into a rolling connected car IoT ecosystem, right? The ability to do all of these things from within the car. So essentially, if you need to, you could put your phone away, and these things could function for you inside the car. So that's a very simple summary of new mobility. But I've thought through a lot of the different pieces and kind of broken it down into 4 main categories that new mobility brings. And then we'll look at them and map them in to how identity helps. So the first one is connectivity. That's what changes everything for the car, because we go from having basically what would be an IoT device except for connectivity. We've got multiple different smart devices inside of the car connected to lots of different constrained devices and sensors and all these other things without any connectivity. So before connectivity, if you want to make a change to your car, you have to take it into the dealer. They have to connect to the OBD2 port, maybe flash an update. But if anyone who has a Tesla knows, they can just push remote updates over the air to your car, just like it can push to the phone, right? So connectivity really is one of the initial things that changes everything, but it also is going to enable lots of new user experiences. Sharing is a big disruptor in the new mobility era, whether it's ride sharing, car sharing, basically vehicle as a service economy we're seeing happen all over the place. And so you can't really do sharing without knowing who's in the car. And that's one of the parts of the future of identity that I'll talk with you about today. The third one is autonomous. So we're familiar with vehicle autonomy and all of the things that people are working on around there from Google and everyone else and Uber. So that's another piece of new mobility. But the big one that connects back to all those is monetized services and the ability to do that from a connected vehicle. So within these 4 things, we get new mobility. And there's an interesting intersection here with what happened with the cell phone market a while back. So if we look at, let's say, Apple, for example, and we look at the Apple smartphone, at some point it wasn't just about how many units can we sell, it was about what kind of services can we sell through the device. So in this case, music, they get a cut of every song sold through iTunes, same thing with apps. They've taken their jump into payments, right? But what's the next thing they did that's relevant to us? They centralized identity. We're talking about iCloud now, but think about before and after iCloud. Now, you get a new phone, you've got all your stuff in iCloud, you type in authenticate, all your information comes down, it can be synchronized with your other phone. So they brought identity in and centralized it across their devices. Now, how much does that apply to what the automotive makers want to do today? Very much so. They want to give you that same kind of experience, but they don't have identity as part of their core today. They don't even focus very much on customer identity and access management yet. They're discovering that they need to, but their industry is not really caught up with some of what we're familiar, the use cases we talk about. We talk about insurance and financial services and retail and all the great things that we've been able to do for them from a customer identity and access management, better user experience and so forth. But the auto industry has been about selling units, and basically the relationship with you kind of would go through the warranty end if you were an owner, and they probably would have very little relationship with you if you bought a used car. So let's look at a series of types of identities that will be needed and that we're working on across the connected car space. So obviously, people, right? Customer identity and access management. Give your customers a great experience logging in, creating an account, logging into the portal, being able to set your settings, your preferences, but not just online. That needs to flow down to the car and make it really easy. So that's an obvious one. That's for owners. That's for authorized drivers, renters, maintainers. They're going to be able to need to authenticate to the car so that the car can determine what they're actually allowed to do in it, whether they own it or not. The vehicle itself is an important one. So right before my talk, Daniel was talking about the Identity Edge Controller and ForgeRock Edge Security. This is where that comes in within the car use case, okay? So the car itself needs its own digital identity as a smart IoT, I guess, ecosystem you would call it. So we would use the identity edge controller inside of the car so that when it rolls off the assembly line, it's got trusted crypto material, it can onboard itself. It's basically like the process of getting a passport versus just signing up for Facebook. There's the secure process that goes behind it, the cryptography, and then our backend solutions and our edge solutions to basically allow that car to onboard in a way that not only is it registering its identity, but we trust it at a very high level of assurance that when that car sends a message, we know it was that car and we can trust the data that comes from it. And that's very important because another area in our ecosystem is cloud services. And so it's not just the car talking to the cloud. It's going to be the car talking to lots of different cloud services, OEM cloud service, third-party cloud service for music, for apps, for entertainment, you name it. All right? So there needs to be mutual authentication between the vehicle itself and all the different cloud interfaces that it needs to speak to. That's another set of identity. Next is the sensors and the ECUs inside of the car. They're going to need identities as well because what we're finding with the automakers is they want to make sure that the sensors that are put in the car, the sensors that are replaced in the car, are trusted and that they are compatible with the vehicle and basically that they're authenticated. So back to ForgeRock Edge Security, being able to use the Edge controller to proxy onboard those and build relationships of those sensors that they're part of that car and they're related to that owner and so on and so forth. So now we've got the identities of the sensors within each connected car ecosystem. What about software? So we've done a couple of interesting builds and POCs around identity of software itself, of a software build. And it's a lot around sometimes authenticating that that software was signed, that it is a trusted piece of software so that there's not a compromised piece of software running. If the car were to be hacked and some changes were made to the software, that could be detected because it no longer matches, let's say, the hash that it was supposed to have. And trusted updates have updated identities, and there's a chain of relationships between the original software version and the software versions that flowed down that then were updated securely over the air, which is from the cloud services down to the car through to the ECUs. Right? Finally, this infrastructure bubble here means everything else. So it could mean another car driving on the road for vehicle to vehicle. It could mean the car to a traffic light or any kind of other smart city infrastructure piece. But the vehicle itself and all of its sensors and its driver and all that context needs to be able to connect to other infrastructure in a trusted way, which is why we need the edge security to be able to onboard the car in a trusted way from the beginning. Daniel mentioned previously relationships. All of this is critical in this arena too, because all of these things tie together, and it doesn't mean a whole lot if you don't know how they're connected together, who's the authorized owner of the car, who are the authorized drivers, the software. It's all got to come together and work together. So other themes that we talked about we talked about digital identities, business value, and customer focus or customer experience. So I think this is an interesting triangle at the core of everything because you've got to have the identities to be able to feed the business value and the customer focus, and those things kind of feed each other. But then there's a second triangle that puts it all together, which is the trust, the security, and the privacy. And the way I see it is these things are linked together where the identities and the customer focus, the business piece is at the core, and that feeds into the trust, which is related to security, which is related to privacy. They all coincide with each other, right? So all of these pieces are themes that we talk about a lot at ForgeRock. They've been interwoven throughout the talks yesterday and today, and all of them apply inside of the car as a connected ecosystem. So let's get into monetized services inside the car, and we can see how these things will apply as we think through it. So the first one is connectivity. We talk about that a lot because it's a very important piece, okay? The next one is payments. How about if you're able to actually get into a car, whether you own it or not, and you authenticate to the car. You authenticate to the car, it goes to the cloud, it brings your profile down, and there's an integration with a capability that's got relationships with the banks, the right certifications, the ability to provision to those to the secure unit inside of the car, the secure chip, so that when you get in the car and authenticate, suddenly your credit card information is already in and part of the car, securely provisioned. So now when you go through a drive-through or when you go into parking, The car just makes a payment on your behalf. Maybe you put your fingerprint, maybe you do an authorized, but there's no more reaching through and swiping. It just happens because your payment information was provisioned down to the car. Same thing with connectivity. Your network operator, your mobile network operator. So today, they're finding that a lot of people don't want to sign up for a second data plan and pay extra to have a connected car that they can actually have data go through. There's some resistance to that. But what if your AT&T, your Verizon, your Orange, whatever your network is, could just be provisioned to the car while you're driving it, even if it's a rental, so that when your phone rings, it just rings in the car and the data that you use goes right against your data plan. Being able to bring all that into the car is a good experience for the users in terms of convenience. It can't happen without identity, without knowing who you are and being able to give you strong authentication inside the car so that your credit card's not going down to someone else's account when they're using your car. Features is an interesting thing now that the automakers are looking at in vehicle as a service, because imagine you get into a car and you authenticate and you have 50 more horsepower and the car does 6 other things that it didn't do for the last person because you're subscribed for a higher level of horsepower, you're subscribed to the satellite radio so it lights up for you, you've paid for these different features as part of your subscription, and so they light up for you when you authenticate. Next guy gets in the car, it goes a lot slower, it doesn't have satellite radio hookup and all these other things, right? Another convenience for the user that can be monetized by the automotive industry as a recurring revenue channel that's not just about selling units. Entertainment is another one. Right? Being able to get your Netflix in the car and backseat entertainment for your kids, all those different types of things. Insurance, right? I don't know about you, but we've talked about privacy. If you're going to take one of those little OBD2 sticks and plug it in from your insurance company, there's a lot of data available flowing off of that port. And whatever you sign up for, I don't know how much data they're taking, but they can see a lot. So what if you could use user-managed access from inside of the car to allow a certain amount of scopes of what the insurance company can see right through the infotainment system of the car, get your better insurance discount, but know that they don't have access to just absolutely everything, and that you could take it back if you want, if you're no longer comfortable. Maybe you lose your discount, but at least you're in control of it. Do it from inside the car, do it from your mobile app, from your phone, do it from your web browser, right? We think that's going to be a pretty big one. And then, of course, advertising. Now, each one of these things in this monetized services picture basically represents an industry. The features piece represents the automotive industry. The other ones I think are obvious, but all these different industries have a game inside of the connected car, and each one of them need a component or more or many of identity in order to make it work, which is why we're so excited about digital identity in the connected car. Now, let's switch to user experience. As a driver, how does it benefit me? Why do I want it? Why do I care? What does identity do for me? Well, connectivity, again, that enables everything. So it's cool for me because now I can look at whatever I need to online right from inside of my car. And if you've driven a Tesla, that's a pretty big screen. That's a lot better real estate than your smartphone. So there's a lot of cool things you can do from your car once it's connected. Personalization, we have built a demo I'm going to talk about in a few minutes that you can actually authenticate to the car. And once you do, it pulls down your profile from the cloud. If you've chosen French, your language changes to French. Your credit card piece comes down. The arrangement of your icons is how you wanted it in the car, right? All those different kinds of things. So get in the car and have it light up all around you with all of the things that you saved either from the car to the cloud, or you went and configured on the portal in your customer identity and access management sense, and then it follows you around to any car. Services, we've talked about that. A lot of convenience, concierge-style services for users that can be monetized on the other hand and is very beneficial for users on the other side. Of course, autonomous, right? Having Ubers be able to come get you without a driver. You really want to know that the car that's showing up is an actual Uber car, right? That it's not one that's been spoofed. And the Uber car is not going to have a driver, so it needs to know that it's actually you, the person who called it, is coming to pick it up, because there's nobody to say, hey, are you Ashley? Yeah, I'm Ashley. Okay, go on, let's go. So privacy controls, the insurance example, and others. I think that it's something like 4 gigabytes of data per mile or more that's generated by the car, a connected car while you're driving it. There's so much information. I'm thinking back to Stacy's talk yesterday about how much information can be found out about you or de-anonymized with just 4 attributes. So this car knows you pretty well. It knows how you're driving, how fast you're driving, where you're driving, where you've been, so on and so forth. And obviously sharing. Some people are monetizing or starting to try startups that monetize their vehicles. So it's like Airbnb for your car. The automakers are doing it too. Or you can subscribe to a certain class of vehicle or to a certain type of vehicle and then use it for that amount of time and then return it. So all these different things are changing. But if you look again at each one of these words on here, identity is needed in this context inside of the car. So what are we doing about it? Well, what is the future of identity in this context? And really, if you think about it, it applies beyond just cars. It applies to vehicles and other things, which we'll talk about drones in a minute. So what we've done is we've joined an organization called Automotive Grade Linux. It's under the Linux Foundation, and it was put together to basically solve the problem of all of those really cool infotainment systems that are inside of your newer cars, where you've got your satellite, GPS integrated with your phone integrated and backup camera and all that stuff. Those things are, for the very most part, running Linux systems. And the way that the automotive industry works today is that they have a very slow turnaround in their production cycle. If they're planning something now, you might see it in 5 years. And that's just the way that they do it. Again, think of that vehicle rolling over. There's a lot of safety concerns and testing and regulatory things they have to go through. But that process doesn't apply very well to the IT cycle that is now part of the Linux operating system that's in the center dash of that car. So what they started doing is just outsourcing it to their tier 1 suppliers, just like they did transmissions and engines and exhaust and all those types of things. And that's proven to be very, very expensive. And so they're looking now, and this is driven kind of initially by the Japanese automotive manufacturers. But as you can see here, all of these labels are members of AGL, participating at various levels, and the total membership, including ForgeRock, is something around 94. It's getting close to 100. There's just another announcement of about 4 or 5 companies that joined. So what they do is they've got an open source baseline Linux image that has security layered in and all these basic framework pieces, so that any automotive manufacturer can pull it off the shelf and then add their layer of customization to it, the look and feel, and not have to start over every single time. So we thought this is a great opportunity. When we first joined them, they really didn't have, again, any concept of identity inside of the car. So we joined and we started going and giving talks about why identity is important to you, automotive manufacturer and automotive developer, and these are the things that it's going to do, help you differentiate in your business. So we built some more edge software to actually run in the car on the AGL system in our demo. So at the top here you see ForgeRock Identity Platform. That should be pretty familiar. The bottom piece represents kind of a high-level architecture boxes of the AGL operating system that runs in the car, right? So there's an application framework, there's a Linux operating system, applications, all these different pieces. So what we've done is we've built a standards-based identity agent that runs in the car, connects to the security framework, connects to the application framework, and is compliant with all the AGL stuff, if you will. So that brings the concept of identity inside of the car. That allows us to authenticate a user into the car itself. So this is a new concept, and I think we're going to see it beyond just cars or even drones, but it's the concept of, without a keyboard, and think back to the Alexa demo, I need to authenticate myself as a human to a device so that it knows who I am, so it can check what I can do. And that's what's happening inside the car, right? In this case, it's personalization, which also includes security restrictions, which we'll get to. But authenticating inside of the car, pretty important. So the first step in the demo is we go out to profile management, we authenticate. We've got the push authentication integrated, so there's no passwords there. And there's a relationship between the user, the vehicle identification number, and the key to the car. So we've got that relationship built. So next, we've got a Bluetooth fob that we hacked. It was meant to be used as a second factor authenticator, but we used it to represent, for demonstration purposes, like you're clicking the key fob of your car. So in the first demo that we have built now, you can click that key, it's associated with your account, authenticate at the edge with our standards-based agent, take that authentication back to the cloud, back to the ForgeRock software, bring back your profile, bring back your OAuth tokens, your customization, and so forth. So right now that's happening through Bluetooth, could happen through NFC, other types of channels, and then that goes through the internet connectivity of the car and goes out to the cloud. So it's pretty cool stuff. The other thing that happens there is we have built in the ability to show sharing. So there's a dealer portal. You go in, you sell a car as a dealer. That creates the first relationship. As the owner of the vehicle, you're able to share it with someone else who's in the same identity ecosystem right through the auto manufacturer's portal. And as the owner, you can say, I'm going to let Sam drive the car. He can open the trunk. He can view things online, but he can't drive over 60 miles an hour or 80 miles an hour. He can't install new software. So you set those permissions for each one that you share within the car. When they authenticate, that comes down, and because we're integrated, right, back with the whole operating system, then we can tell the car to put those restrictions in place or to customize things that way. So we have found a great reception to this for all the auto manufacturers we've been speaking with, because they need this piece so that they can monetize services through the car. That's part of their business plan. They're being very disrupted, and they have to be able to do that. So what about these guys? And this is where it gets kind of fun and interesting. There's lots and lots of drones out there, and a couple of months ago, we had a pretty interesting conversation with NASA, who was working with the FAA to actually create this whole system of air traffic control, if you will, for drones between, 0 and 500 feet, or whatever that first airspace is. It's from the ground to the first official airspace. So they're looking at doing things, everything as you see on the screen here, from agriculture, surveillance, cargo delivery, pictures, all these different things. But it all comes back to the same list of things that we just talked about that you need an identity, but in this case, it's for drones, right? The first thing they asked us is, how are we going to do authorization? How do we use, can we use OAuth to do this? They basically need a big web of relationships that says which drones can fly where and when and how high, and then they need to be able to instantly reshift everything if there's an emergency, and they need a rescue helicopter to fly through, and they need all the drones there in this area to land or to make way so that there's half a mile berth for a helicopter to fly through. So it was really interesting to talk with them about this use case and see how we can apply all the same technologies that we've been talking about to drones. But it doesn't stop there, because when I initially thought of drones, and probably you too, you think of little drones or even drones that are maybe this big. But there's other things that are happening out there in the world of drones where the stakes are also even higher than the little drones that are out there. So Nautilus is a startup that wants to build a 777-sized drone that is amphibious and will take off and land from seaports and basically carry cargo faster and cheaper than where it's typically stored in commercial airliners, and of course faster than the 504 hours that it takes for it to go on a typical ship. So let's think of identity in this context. How important is it that a bad actor doesn't get access to remotely fly this thing around and go basically have a 777-sized missile they could remote control? All of the systems that run inside of this need to be secured, and identity is another piece of that as well. So I find that pretty interesting. But if that's not enough for you, then you can get in your own drone. So hop into the eHang 184, a single-seater drone where you put in some information into your smartphone, and the thing takes off, and the question is, how high do you want to go? Want to go this high, maybe that high? Want to go that high in a drone? There's no controls, there's just a smartphone, and it's operating and doing its own thing, and I would want that to be trusted. I would not want that to be hacked. Stakes are kind of high there as well, right? So the future of identity, after seeing everything that we've been talking about here, is happening right here and now, and you're a part of it, and we're a part of it, and it's really exciting. We're doing really cool things. And so if you think about the road ahead, I just scratched the surface with talking about cars that people drive. We talked a little bit about autonomous cars and drones, but we've been talking to some customers that have great big trucks, and they had some of the same things that we talked about here. They want to know about the secure software delivery to the truck. They want to be sure that all the pieces and parts in it are authenticated. We've been talking to people that have large fleets. So you want to do fleet management. You want to know which driver is in which vehicle at what time and what they're allowed to do with a vehicle. I always think that fleets in terms of law enforcement and emergency response is very interesting because you have a vehicle that can do special things. You know, it can put on the lights and sirens and go places other vehicles can't go. But imagine if the vehicle itself isn't allowed to do that without the right person being authenticated to it. Talk about relationships and the future of what could be with relationships. A law enforcement officer gets into the car and authenticates to the car. Because of his authentication and his attributes saying that he is, in fact, a sworn law enforcement officer and he can do A, B, and C, now the car knows that it's him who's in there and has his contact. So in turn, the car is then authorized to talk to all these other things in a smart city ecosystem where maybe that car, if somebody steals it, it's not going to automatically open gates to restricted areas, but because that car is coming through and you trust the identity of the car, you know who's authenticated to it, all the relationships are there, that car can then automatically tell gates to open, change traffic lights to be green for them, warn other drivers around them. All these other things can happen, right? So whether it's planes, cars, trucks, snowmobiles, vehicles, the future is identity gets physical, right? NIST calls it cyber physical systems for a reason. They don't usually say IoT. They say cyber physical systems because that's really what we're getting into here. So I hope you've enjoyed. Take a look at YouTube and go to our ForgeRock page. We've got a full video of the demo that we built out there, so check that out. And thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us today.